This is Letter from America. Today's topic is CCC shows amazing resilience in escalating ZANU PF violence. An attempt by ZANU PF thugs to disrupt a CCC rally in Bikita was met with stiff resistance by CCC members. While this might have been an isolated incident, because there have not been many clashes between CCC and ZANU PF members, the event was undoubtedly an ominous sign of things to come. ZANU PF propaganda accused CCC members of attacking ZANU PF members who allegedly had come to register as voters. This was such a blatant lie that even the ZANU PF Director of Information had to delete his tweet. What was the undeniable truth was that ZANU PF supporters who were assaulted and injured by CCC activists in Gokwe North on Sunday had tried to disrupt the CCC party meeting. There are a few similar incidents where CCC youths have clashed and overwhelmed ZANU PF thugs. But the fact is, they are such incidents. The official policy of CCC is a peaceful campaign. However, CCC spokesperson Fadzai Mahere has repeatedly stated that CCC's commitment to a peaceful campaign is not a sign of weakness. ZANU PF now assumes CCC members are weak and can be assaulted without any retaliation. A mass uprising in Zimbabwe scares ZANU PF. During the Arab Spring in 2011, a series of anti-government protests, uprisings, and armed rebellions spread across much of the Arab world. It began in Tunisia in response to corruption and economic stagnation. From Tunisia, the protests then spread to 5 other countries: Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and Bahrain. In Zimbabwe, the late President Mugabe wanted to know from his security chiefs if the Arab Spring could spread to Zimbabwe. The security chiefs initially said they doubted it, but they warned Mugabe that the probability of a mass uprising in Zimbabwe was very high. Mugabe was advised by his security chiefs that if there was a mass uprising, the country's security forces would not be able to contain it. At this point, Mugabe ordered the intensification of the repression of opposition members by all means possible. But that was not new. There was nothing new in ZANU PF escalation of violence against MDCT supporters. This had been going on since the year 2000. The news that ZANU PF thugs who killed CCC supporters and injured many other members had been released from police custody made a mockery of the police and the judicial system in Zimbabwe. But this should not come as a surprise because Mnangagwa, Chiwengwa, and ZANU PF have effectively captured the state in Zimbabwe. In fact, the state system was captured back in 2000 when the newly formed MDC, led by the late Morgan Tsvangirai, gained national mass support to the extent of gaining almost 50% of the parliamentary seats in the general elections. Since 2000, ZANU PF has maintained the tradition of politically motivated violence to stay in power. The vicious and barbaric attacks by the ZANU PF mobs on innocent civilians at the CCC rallies in Gokwe and Kwekwe last year were in keeping with this tradition of coercive violence. There were two motivations for ZANU PF violence. First, it's the ZANU PF tradition to use Machiavellian techniques to force and coerce people into supporting it. The second is the Russian invasion and continued attacks on Ukraine has included increasing numbers of civilians being killed. This has emboldened ZANU PF in two respects. ZANU PF now thinks killing civilians is the way to achieve one's objectives. And while the world's attention is focused on this invasion of Ukraine, ZANU PF thinks no one will pay attention to its own atrocities against civilians in Zimbabwe. Following mounting international pressure, though, ZANU PF sent police to arrest, in quotes, the so-called ZANU PF perpetrators. But this was only to appear as if ZANU respects the rule of law. As a matter of fact, members of the police, army, and other security agencies are increasingly becoming restless because their living conditions are getting worse. A family of a member of the security agency, whether it's the army or the police, is going through the same poverty conditions as any other citizen in Zimbabwe. Soldiers and police are now asking why they are being forced to suppress, harass, and torture members of the CCC. On their way to a rally, members of CCC leadership said they went through several roadblocks just to frustrate them and perhaps get them to change their decision about going to the rallies. Police were dispatched to a CCC rally to disperse it. This was the same rally police had agreed earlier that it should be held. This was last year. The social media were full of videos of police using water cannons to disperse the crowds in Gokwe and Kai. Police looked foolish and confused by having to break up the rally that they had permitted earlier. In the past, such tactics by the police had worked with relative success. But this time round, there is an evolving spirit of defiance, especially among the CCC youths. Young Zimbabweans feel they have no future in their own country under the ZANU PF administration. 9 out of 10 Zimbabweans are unemployed. University graduates have to survive by vending. One graduate was wearing his graduation robes while selling tomatoes. Another was selling airtime. When the police brought the water cannon to disperse the CCC rally in Gokwe last year, young people did not run away far. They kept running around and saying to each other, "Let us wait until the water in the water cannon is finished." And when the water was finished, the youths went after the police truck, throwing stones at it. The driver of the truck, knowing what was coming to him, drove the trucks fast away from the pursuing youths. Another act of defiance was when the police allowed the CCC rally to take place in Gokwe, but they imposed a limit of just 100 and banned any celebrations, singing or dancing. Citizens from Gokwe came in thousands. They danced, they sang, and they celebrated in open defiance of the police orders. These are signs of a new defiance campaign in Zimbabwe. As long as the political environment is oppressive, and as long as the economic conditions continue on their downhill trajectory, youths feel they have nothing to lose and that they have to defy ZANU PF. a prominent youth member of ZANU PF who defected and resigned from ZANU PF, stated that while in party he and many others thought Mnangagwa and ZANU PF were Zizi Risina Manyanga, or an owl without horns, and this would make it fearsome. This was an owl that claimed it had horns to make it fearsome, to make people fear it. But that's what Mnangagwa and ZANU PF portrayed themselves as. But these youths discovered that Mnangagwa and ZANU PF is Zizi Risina Manyanga, or an owl without horns. ZANU PF has been in power for 42 years now. ZANU PF feels confident they can stay in power indefinitely, so they think. That is exactly the same as how the Boers in apartheid South Africa used to think. But both ZANU PF and the Boers received the same prophetic warning, which they both ignored. In the case of ZANU PF, this prophetic warning is coming from a 44-year-old Nelson Chamisa. Chamisa has repeatedly told the oppressors that they cannot stay in power indefinitely, and that change is coming sooner than they think. Whether they like it or not, change is coming. In the case of Boers in apartheid South Africa, this prophetic warning came from the former British Prime Minister. On February 3, 1960, the then British Prime Minister Harold Macmillan gave his famous "The Wind of Change" speech in the apartheid South African Parliament. In that speech, Macmillan told the whites-only apartheid members of both houses of Parliament of the Union of South Africa, Cape Town, about what was going on throughout Africa. British colonies throughout Africa were getting their independence, and they were now being ruled by the majority Africans. Indeed, the decade of the 1960s was a historic moment for Africa. British colonialism and white imperialism were ending in Africa, and in what Macmillan called the wind of change sweeping across Africa. What Macmillan told the apartheid Boers 62 years ago would apply today in Zimbabwe had Macmillan been alive to address Mnangagwa, Chiwengwa, and ZANU PF. Macmillan's message to the white Boers who thought they would rule South Africa forever was very blunt. Macmillan then had this apocalyptic and very blunt message to the Boers. He said, "The wind of change is blowing through this continent, and whether we like it or not, this growth of national consciousness is a political fact. We must all accept it as a fact, and our national policies must take account of it. As I have said, the growth of national consciousness in Africa is a political fact. That means I would judge that we must come to terms with it." That was Macmillan addressing the apartheid South African Parliament 62 years ago. The Boers in apartheid South Africa believed they were chosen by God to rule South Africa forever. The Boers did not believe Africans had any human rights. They believed that Africans were destined by God to be servants of the white man. They believed the biblical Joshua 9 verse 23 referred to Africans as being cast forever slaves and hewers of wood and drawers of water. Why was Macmillan's wind of change speech so apocalyptic? Exactly 34 years later, after his wind of change speech to the Boers, apartheid and white minority rule in South Africa came to a dramatic end. On April 27, 1994, black South Africans were able to vote in national elections for the first time in their lives. And the late Nelson Mandela and the ANC emerged the decisive winners, ushering in the first black government under President Mandela. And this is exactly what Macmillan, as in the words of a prophet, had admonished the white Boers in 1960, that black independence was coming, whether the Boers liked it or not. If Macmillan was alive today and had an opportunity to talk to Mnangagwa, Chiwengwa, and ZANU PF, he would have told them exactly the same thing that he told the Boers in 1960. Macmillan would have told ZANU PF that CCC is today's wind of change in Zimbabwe. To be blunt, for ZANU PF, CCC is the apocalyptic wind of change Macmillan told the apartheid South African Boers in 1960. ZANU PF has misruled Zimbabwe for 42 years now. Just like the apartheid Boers, ZANU PF believes it has a God-given right to rule Zimbabwe indefinitely. The late Mugabe used to boast that he was anointed by God to rule Zimbabwe forever. He even boasted that after his death, he would still rule Zimbabwe from his grave. But the ideology of ZANU PF determination to stay in power indefinitely was explained by Kumbirai Kangai when he said ZANU PF would never allow free and fair elections after the first independence elections in 1980. This position was echoed by the late Mugabe when he declared that the ballot could never replace the bullet. When Mugabe and ZANU PF lost the 2008 elections, Mugabe refused to accept defeat and stayed in power by force of arms. Between 500 and 1,000 supporters of the then MDCT, led by the late Morgan Tsvangirai, were killed by ZANU PF thugs. Tsvangirai's BMW car, which had been donated from South Africa, was seized by the police. It is still being held by the police today, 14 years after it was illegally seized. The late reggae singer Bob Marley also sang with a prophetic voice about what will happen to the oppressors. In one of his songs, Bob Marley sang, "Them belly full, but we hungry. Woe to the downpresser or oppressor. Whosoever diggeth the pit of oppression shall fall in it." These are but a few examples of profound, immutable truths cloaked in the everyday language of the common folk. Zimbabweans are increasingly ignoring all the restrictions that are being placed on their attendance at CCC rallies. This is a sign of a new defiance campaign. The recognition that ZANU PF is Zizi Risina Manyanga, and as Makomborero Aruzibeshe once said, "We are many, they are few. We are the ones we have been waiting for." Zimbabweans are increasingly recognizing that it is they who must fight to liberate themselves. And the young Zimbabweans have now taken the first steps of that defiance campaign. And that defiance campaign simply states that ZANU PF will not rule Zimbabwe forever. And the winds of change, the words of prophets and young Zimbabwean revolutionaries are now circling above ZANU PF like vultures over a carcass. But the unanswered question in this situation in Zimbabwe is, what will Zimbabweans do? Will they allow themselves to be slaughtered like sheep? There are slogans some human rights activists have been chanting in calls to action by the Zimbabweans. Some of these popular slogans are Zvakwana, Sokwanele, enough, Kusikufa ndekupi. We are many, there are few.
This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation in Zimbabwe. Thank you for listening. This concludes today's broadcast of Letter from America, a weekly in-depth analysis of the situation